Hello guys! I'm super excited for this new book video. So today I'm going to do a monthly wrap-up of the months of July, August and September. I'll have my notes down here, so if I'm looking down it's because I'm just checking that I touched all the points I wanted to talk about. So let's get started. I'll first talk about two books from the same series. The book one is called Court of Dragons and Crowns. The second book is called Court of Dragons and Bows. It's written by Bailey. I don't remember the last name. I have a tendency to forget names, so I'll for sure write all the information that you need somewhere here or here. But basically the genre is romantasy. The tropes are daily trials, competition, reverse harem, white shoes, dragon shifter kings, elemental magic a little bit, also hidden royalty, political intrigues, and court intrigues. So in terms of plot, we are following the journey of the female main character. I forgot her name because it's been a while since I read this book, but again, I'll write her name somewhere. We are following her journey. She's just a human girl who never really believed in magic because she didn't have a reason to believe in it until the day she's taken away by four dragon kings who tell her that she needs to compete in this deadly competition to become a bride, and only four can succeed because there are four kings, and the one that succeeds stay alive. The rest, as you might guess, are not alive. So this competition is needed because if the dragon kings don't find a bride until a given time, so in 100 days, um, the court loses all the powers. So this competition is needed in their world. We also get introduced that there are 6 different worlds, but the main focus is obviously a little bit on the human world and the world where you have these dragon kings. In terms of writing, pacing, and like the rest, the pacing was fast because the book is under 200 pages. Same for book 2. I believe it's pretty much the same for all the books uh, because you have 5 books in this series. So I quite enjoyed the pace. You didn't have any filler chapters, so it's a perfect book if you want kind of to dilute what you're reading at the moment. So that's something that I really enjoyed. I actually gave the first book 3 stars because you had some great moments, but it didn't really stick with me. Um, I felt like it wasn't anything new and that there would be better books of this genre out there. So just keep that in mind. I did like the female character. I thought that she was really brave and not naive and whiny, so that's something I really appreciated. There was one thing that I did dislike though, which is not that important, is that the physical traits of the Dragon Kings didn't match their elemental court. For example, the Fire King had dark hair, which is fine, but then the Water King had red hair with green eyes, and I just couldn't picture him as a water dragon king. But then it's up to the author how they see their characters. But for me as a reader, it was sometimes really hard to connect with the plot, the dragon kings and their court. That's just my opinion. Then honestly, as I said, it was a short read, nothing extraordinary, so I thought of continuing the series because I kind of did like it. So for book 2, it's a totally different conversation because it was honestly a mess. I usually don't read Hypnosis when I buy the second book, and I wish I did because I would for sure not buy it. The author decides to throw in some Greek mythology, which I usually love. I love Greek mythology, but here it was already overwhelming with the 6 different worlds you have, and the world the author created was already complex. But when you add Greek mythology, which is huge, you have so many stories, it just doesn't fit in here. So I was disappointed when I saw it, and anytime Greek mythology was mentioned, I was honestly cringing and feeling super disconnected from the plot. Second thing is that it felt like a fan thing of Fourth Wing. You also had dragon riders, you also had a war. The dragons were picking the riders on a specific day, so basically the thrashing for those that read Fourth Wing. So this also like really put me off because it was just too much, too many new things in book two that didn't match at all. So I was quite disappointed because even though it was a fast read again, I just didn't enjoy it, which is why I gave it 2.5 stars. And one thing to know about me is that if I give 3 stars, it means that the book wasn't exceptional, but they were still great moments. If I'm giving less than 3 stars, that means that there were moments that I really disliked. And one more thing is that we already had the white shoes in book one. We already had 4 options. Um, and then in book two, we have 5. And I was like, okay, the wireless fantasy are coming alive, but I just again felt it was too much. So would I recommend this series? I don't think so because I'm sure there are better books of this genre and tropes out there. However, if that's your jam, why not? Because it's honestly a super fast-paced read and short read, so you can always, I think, enjoy it. So it's up to you if you want to give it a shot or not. I personally wouldn't recommend. Now I'm going to talk about Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, written by Rebecca Yarros. So both books are from the same series, and the genre is romantasy. The tropes are deadly trials, competition, found family, enemies to lovers, political intrigues, magical bonds, and magical powers, and also underdog protagonist. In terms of plot, we are following the journey of Violet, who comes from a powerful family. Her mother is a respected general and dragon rider, same for her siblings, and then her dad is a scribe. And Violet was always supposed to become a scribe. Since the world in there is divided in 4 categories. You have scribes, so historians, healers, infantry, so army on the floor, and riders. And the reason for this division is because technically their country is still at war. And so, as I said, she was supposed to become a scribe, but last minute her mom changes. But last minute her mother changes the decision, and Violet is thrown into the Rider's Quadrant, a quadrant that is kind of called as the Death Factory because not a lot of people can make it through the trials, and especially thrashing, so the day when the dragons pick the rider. So that's how the journey starts. I honestly love this book. Uh, it is quite long. It's over usually 500 to 600 pages depending on the edition you're reading. And I remember that I didn't notice the time passing when I was reading book one because the way Rebecca writes is that you get attached not only to the main characters but especially to any secondary characters you have. She just throws in this name, then a small sentimental sentence, and you're hooked and you're really rooting for everyone to make it. And I remember you had really sentimental moments. I had tears in my eyes. I just don't know how she does it, but you're really in this book. That's how you feel. You feel like you're, I wouldn't say with them, but you're genuinely rooting for every single character that you encounter. In terms of writing, it's not clean writing, FYI, but it was pretty fast paced, even though it's a 600-page book, and I really enjoyed it. I gave the first book 4 stars. And now talking about the second book, I won't really talk about the plot because you do have a lot of plot twists in Fourth Wing, so I feel like if I'm going to talk about the second book, I might spoil some stuff, so I won't do it. But I'll talk about the writing and the structure of the book. So this time it was a bit different. The first part of the second book was mainly focused on Violet and Xaden and on their kind of love-hate relationship. which is why it felt slow. I generally put down the book a lot of times, and I wouldn't say I forgot about it, but I didn't feel that need to read more. Whereas in book one, I just couldn't put it down. Here, I just felt like it was so focused on the romance part that we kind of were missing the great assets that this series has is the secondary characters. I was missing them a lot. You still had great moments, super emotional moments in part one, but I think just because it was so focused on the love-hate relationship between the main characters, you kind of lose all the other good stuff. But then book two, we find our secondary characters again, and it just gets as good as it was in book one. So I was happy to kind of like find again that pacing, that plot structure that we had in the first book. I gave the book still 4 stars because even though I didn't enjoy the first part as much as the whole book one or the second part of book two, you still had some key elements in the first part that I was just bawling. Honestly, it was amazing. Just thinking about it, I have tears in my eyes. So both books for me earned their 4 star. And would I recommend this series? Definitely. If you're into competition and like these trials, if that's your type of fantasy, you're going to love it. I genuinely highly recommend these books. Now I'm going to talk about a standalone that I read. It's called The Dance of Twilight. Again, don't remember the name of the author, so I'll mention it somewhere here. The genre is dark romantasy with spice, and the tropes are enemies to lovers, political and court intrigues, and magic. A big warning, very please read the trigger warnings for this book because the backstory of the female main character is solely based on the trigger warning, so make sure that you're comfortable with that. And it was so present, but actually I became a bit uncomfortable, so just FYI. For the plot, we're following the journey of Ornella, who is the princess of the Crystal Fae, and she has always dreamt of adventure and not just becoming someone's wife and have kids. She just wanted something more. And so one day she gets taken away by her savior from a really bad situation, but then she learns that her savior is not the one she thought he was. So that's pretty much for the plot. So my thoughts on the book. I actually loved the beginning. It was so good. This slow burn was so amazing. But I genuinely forgot that it was enemies to lovers. And I couldn't even see it happening. I was like, how can it happen after such good romance? And when it did happen, the enemies to lovers trope hit. That's when the male main character, Nicholas, became a jerk. Like, he became so abusive and an emotional monster that I just didn't want to continue reading the book. I still did it so I could do an actual review, but it was so bad. So I wrote down some moments because you have a lot of them. The first thing is that he played into the female's main character fears, so Ornella's fears. She always was scared of being unlovable, unpure, and worthless, and that people would only use her for her princess status, and that once the guy would do the deed, he would kind of dump her, and that's what happened. He literally did that, and she told him that it was one of her fears, so he knew. He still did it. And one thing that really annoyed me is that anytime he was abusive towards her, the next scene would be angry, spicy moment, and I was just like, what the heck is that? I was also shocked because in the beginning the female character was amazing, but then she was letting this abuse happen and being happy with these angry spicy moments. So I was reading it and I was like, what the heck is going on? I was really thinking like, what happened to self-love honor, self-preservation aid was just thrown out of a window. And there were also some plot holes. Basically, it can be a spoiler, so just be mindful. But basically, their lives became linked, like Nicholas and Ornelas. And so, if one of them dies, the other one dies as well. And so, when the abuse was a bit too much and other things were happening to Ornella, she thought, why not just like disappear from this world because it will be better for Nicholas and his court. And I was like, wait, girl, like happens to you, Nicholas dies. So how can you even envision of getting away from this world? You know, like it didn't make any sense. I gave this book, I think, 2 stars because it just turned bad and also didn't make sense. So I wouldn't recommend this book. I think there are better dark romance book out there. This is definitely not a good one. I think what's hard with the enemies to lovers trope is to find that balance where the relationship is like enemies but not toxic. And here it's just like the toxicity is just going one way. It's him being toxic towards her and not her being toxic as well. I feel like it's really hard to find good enemies to lovers book, and this one is definitely not one of them. So just don't read it. I really don't recommend it. The next 4 books I'm going to talk about are from the same series called The Folk of Air, written by Holly Black. The genre is fantasy. The tropes are enemies to lovers, slow burn, court/political intrigues, schemes, secrets, and betrayals, and also mortal in the fairyland. In terms of plot, we're following the journey of Jude, who was 7 years old when she saw her parents getting killed by a magical fae, and then they were taken away by him. So Jude, her twin sister, and her oldest sister were taken away. And so we are following her journey 10 years later when she's 17 and she still tries to find her place in the fae world, a place where she belongs. And so we are following her journey on how she tries to achieve that because it's hard since fae people don't really like humans, and especially one of them despises her. He's called Carden and he is the prince of the High Court of the Fae. So interesting journey to see how she manages to find a place where she feels like she belongs in the Fae world. In terms of my thoughts and opinion, I love this series overall. I feel like book by book it was getting better and better. For the romance part, even though we didn't get a lot of romance, anytime it was there, it was amazing. I think so far it's my favorite enemies to lovers series that I have read this year and any year pretty much. It was just so good. Like all the moments were amazing. If you're in Fable, you'll see that a lot of people will highlight the quotes from pretty much every single romance scene. So you know that it's just quality. However, if we're kind of like talking more about book 1, book 2, or book 3, or book 1.5, book 1 is really different. And for multiple reasons, because I don't know why this series is marketed as romantasy and why people talk about it as a romantasy. It is not. It is just a fantasy book. Yes, we do get some romance, but it's such a subplot that you cannot call it a romantasy. In book 1 is barely present, you barely get any moments. And so I remember I was going into this series thinking it's a romantasy. And so when I didn't get any romance, it's not that I was upset because I usually don't mind the lack of romance. It's just that I wasn't ready for that. However, if you're going with a mindset, oh yeah, I want to read a romantasy, you'll end up disappointed because you just don't really have a lot of romance moments. A second thing also is that oftentimes when you associate like fantasy books, it's with like quest, adventure, but you also don't get it. It's all about politics and court intrigues. It's the main theme of a book, and if it's not your thing, you're not gonna like it because that's pretty much the only plot you have in the book. And so once I realized that, once I finished book one, I started enjoying book two and book three way more because I wasn't expecting any quest to appear. I wasn't expecting any adventure to appear. And especially, I wasn't expecting romantasy. And once I kind of like shifted my mindset, I really started enjoying the series. So be mindful of how you go into reading the Folk of Air. Don't expect romantasy, don't expect adventure and quest. Just expect only like court intrigues. Another thing that I want to mention is that Jude is a really interesting character. She is morally gray, and it was kind of like a breath of fresh air because usually it's the male main character that's morally gray. Here it's Jude, and she is the main protagonist. The story is about her. So I remember that I couldn't really get attached to her book in book one because I wasn't always agreeing with her choices and thoughts because they were sometimes morally wrong. However, once you get used to her, you cannot stop rooting for her. You just want her to succeed in everything, and that's why I think book two and book three were so much better. But I'll for sure do a video dedicated to this series, so stay tuned. And now talking about ranking, I did rank the first book 3.5 stars out of 5 because, as I said, it's not what I expected. Also, I had a hard time connecting with Jude in the beginning. However, I really had a feeling that book 2 would be so much better. And so that's why I kept reading, and I'm so glad I did it. And honestly, I've seen so many people kind of struggling with book 1 because they didn't know what to think. And I've always advised them to keep reading because it does get so much better. And 99% of the time, people do continue this series and they love it. So it's really, from what I've seen, it's just like all about the mindset you go into this series. As I said, don't expect a romantasy. For book 2, I gave it 5 stars. Same for the final book, they were just excellent. And as I mentioned, you have 4 books in this series. The fourth one is the novella, so it's book 1.5, and it's about the twin sister uh, of Jude, and I highly advise reading it. I know some people didn't like it. I did like it because, again, I didn't see her book as an apology. I saw it as her explaining who she is and why she did what she did. And again, if you go with this mindset, I think that you'll definitely enjoy book 1.5. So I highly recommend reading it as well. And I ranked it 4 out of 5. It was such a fast read. I think it's under 50 pages. So I highly recommend reading it. And that's it for this series. The next book I'm going to talk about is book 3 of the Twin Crowns series, written by Catherine Weber and Catherine Doyle. It's called Burning Crowns, and it was a great finale. I love seeing the characters grow, and especially Ren. She finally realized that her actions have consequences. And something that I mentioned in book 2 that I didn't really like book 2 because I felt like Ren was so selfish that it was really hard to connect with the book and really hard to root for her. But here I just love the way her redemption arc worked. Same for her love triangle. I remember being a bit confused in book 2 because I couldn't see who she would end up picking. I also didn't really understand the love triangle, but here we received all the explanations and all the answers, and so I was really satisfied with that. Rose stayed amazing. I think she is the most consistent character um, throughout the series, and not that she stayed the same. I think that she stayed kind of true to herself. She also did grow throughout the series, and I loved seeing her grow as a person. The pace was similar to book one, so it's pretty fast paced, and it was consistent, not like in book two. In book two it was a bit all over the place, but here it was same as book one. It was super easy to read, and I really enjoyed the pace. The romance part was excellent in this book. I think it was written beautifully. I was giggling and chuckling and just blushing so much. It was amazing. And FYI guys, this is YA, so don't expect any spicy scenes. And so the last thing I'm going to say about this book is that I gave it 5 stars, and I'll for sure make a more detailed video about the whole series, so stay tuned. The next book I'm going to talk about is called Wabi Sabi, The Wisdom in Imperfection. Again, I'll mention the author somewhere here. The genre is self-help, and it's the type of book where you're going to read and pause and think about your life, think about the concept that you just learned. And it was so helpful and informative. Also, the structure of the book was amazing. We got some meditation prompts. You also had some pictures in black and white, some pictures that were colorful. We kind of like saw this concept through different categories. You had the category about art, about everyday life. So it was interesting to see how this concept worked in different kind of like categories. So it was such an amazing read. I read it quite quickly because the structure was so fluid. It was really easy to read. I highly recommend it if you're into self-help. I think it's a beautiful book. I actually highlighted 3 quotes that I loved. The first one is perfection does not even exist to begin with. It's only in the realm of our human imagination. And for my perfectionists out there, I think this quote definitely hits the spot. The second quote is, why should we worry about the future or present if nothing will be the same tomorrow as it was yesterday? And again, for me, it was a quote that really spoke to my heart because I tend to worry about everything and not being able to kind of like stay in the present. And the last quote is generally one of my favorite. It's, I secretly wish for the day to come when everything in my life is stable and perfect. On the other hand, I also know that this paradisical state will never come, since the only constant in life is change. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. In terms of rating, I did give the book 4 out of 5. As I said, I really liked it, and I think that if you're someone who worries about perfection, it will really kind of help you to look at life a little bit differently, a little bit with more kindness, and especially with more grace. So I highly recommend this book. The next book I'm going to talk about is called Living Time, written by Jodi Picoult. So Jodi Picoult is an author that I love because she writes from usually from multiple point of views in a way that you get attached to the characters so much. The genre is fiction, paranormal, and mystery. In terms of tropes, we find the animal, elephant. The elephant is really present in the book. So detective work, murder, mystery, paranormal, mother-daughter relationship, dual timeline, and let me check if I haven't missed anything. Also grief and trauma. So it's a really interesting book because all the previous books I have read from Jodi Picoult are not with a paranormal element. And my mother and my sister have been begging me to read this book, and I was kind of not really wanting to read it because usually Jodi Picoult's books are really heavy emotionally. She's the one that wrote My Sister's Keeper. So for those that know the book or the movie, you know how emotional her books are. But I'm so glad that I did read it because it was so good. I love, as I said, fantasy, but also paranormal, and this book hit the spot. If you can think about your favorite paranormal movies, I think that you will find a lot of similarities with this book. So if it's usually the genre you like, I highly recommend reading it. In terms of the plot, we're following the journey of a girl who is 13. Again, I don't remember her name, but we're following her journey where she tries to find her mom who disappeared after um, a murder case at the elephant sanctuary. And so to find her mom, she goes to this medium and asks her for help, and also to the detective that was working on this case. And so I have my notes here and I'm going to look at them because this book was quite emotional. I did cry a few times when I was reading it, but I did read, as I said, other books from Jodie, and they always left me with like tears in my eyes and my head spinning. And this is no different. This book has a lot of morally great characters in the sense that when you read about them, you kind of wondering like, are they the bad person? Yes, but also no, and like what would I've done in their place, because it's super easy to judge people, but once you kind of try to imagine yourself in their shoes, it's a different conversation. And so that's how you feel anytime you're moving into the plot. You're kind of always thinking like what I would have done if I were in their shoes, and the answer is pretty much non-existent because I honestly don't know, because it's so complex. And so the way you also connect with the characters in this book is amazing. You connect with them on a deeper level, and honestly, it was just an amazing book. I remember the beginning was quite slow. We also do get a lot of chapters about elephants because the mother was a researcher and she researched elephants and how they dealt with grief and trauma. So I remember reading these chapters, and yes, it was interesting, but then I was like, how is this connected to a plot? You know, but it is. Once you finish the book, you kind of like think back about all of these chapters about these elephants, and you're like, oh, that's why. So it was actually one of these books where as soon as I finished it, I restarted again, because now that I knew what happened, I was like, oh my gosh, I missed so many moments. So I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars, and if you're into murder mystery, into paranormal, I highly recommend this book. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Hobbit. It's such a classic, but I don't think I need to really talk about the plot, so I'll straight moving into my thoughts. It was fabulous. It was beautiful. The way Tolkien wrote it just gives you such nostalgic feelings as if you're back into your childhood, because he did write, I believe, the story for his son when he was small. So it really gives you the same vibes of like fairy tales that you parents or grandparents or siblings used to read before bed. So I genuinely loved it. I think what surprised me is how much description you had. I know that people say that it's heavy on description, but I didn't expect that we would barely have any dialogue. And honestly, I didn't mind it. I really enjoyed the book because it just, the nature of the book is about description. And I know some people were complaining about that, being like, why there isn't more action, why there isn't more dialogues, and it's so boring. I disagree, because when you know that you're following the journey of Biblo, who is a hobbit, and hobbits are not supposed to leave their home at all, you cannot understand why Biblo, and just like why Tolkien is describing everything Biblo is seeing, is because for him, everything he's seeing is an adventure, since he hasn't ever pretty much left his home. So if you can keep this in mind, I think you won't mind the description, but to each their own. However, I highly recommend reading this book because I mean it's such a classic, and so you've guessed it, I did give it a 5 star. If I could give more stars, I would. The next book I'm going to talk about is A Court of Mist and Fury, so the second book of the series ACOTAR, written by Sarah J. Maas. So if you watch my other videos, I did give the first book 5 stars because I think it's a beautiful Beauty and the Beast retelling. Here it was so much different because we finally entering Sarah's world. So the whole world building is different and I enjoyed it a lot. It was nice to get kind of that breath of fresh air in that new universe. I think Feyre was such an interesting character. I love her as the female main character, and Rhysand was also an excellent character. I just loved how Sarah did show that the things Feyre experienced with previous book still affect her to this day, and that she wasn't the only one affected by it. I also liked how Sarah basically showed that sometimes too much love can be toxic, even if the intention initially was good, and that how hard it is to leave a toxic relationship. So I think it was a really deeper book in terms of like the themes, because the theme of love here is not as, I don't know, as like a fairy tale as it was in book one. So I really enjoyed book two way more. I also did give it 5 stars, but it's nothing compared to the 5 stars I gave in first book. I feel like here it's just way more than 5 stars, so I highly recommend reading it. I know that some people didn't enjoy the first book, and I think it's because it's mainly a retelling of Beauty and the Beast and also two other tales, so it does feel a bit repetitive. It does feel not fresh and boring because, well, that's how usually retellings feel like. However, if you like Beauty and the Beast, I think you'll still enjoy it. And if you're thinking if you should continue the series or not, I would recommend continuing it because you do get kind of like a new world in book two, and such an interesting world with a lot of interesting concept and magic system that I think you'll definitely enjoy it. And now the final book I'm going to talk about is called The Bear and Nightingale, written by, I don't remember the name, I think something Arden, Kristen, I don't remember. I'll write it here. The genre is historical fantasy and Slavic folklore. The tropes we can find are fairy tale vibes, folk tales, folklore, clash of old new beliefs, basically the old beliefs and Christianity. Then strong female protagonist, magic, and really atmospherical setting. In terms of plot, we're following the journey of Vasya, who is a young girl with magical kind of like abilities. She can see this like folklore beings, so the spirit of a river and other magical beings in the Slavic folklore. And her life takes a turn because she gets a stepmom who, like Vasya, can see these magical beings, but she's so scared of them but she wants to suppress it, and she knows that Vasya can see it, and she hates Vasya for it because it kind of reminds her of her own demons and the fact that she cannot come with terms that she also can see this like supernatural elements. And that's when the stepmom calls a priest to the village and asks him to pretty much change the whole culture and belief system the village has. So that's when the clash between Orthodox Christianity and old beliefs comes in. And since you have this clash is directed to Vasya. So it's pretty much about her journey of how she is trying to accept the fact that she can see these supernatural beings, but also how she can defend herself and not be called a witch. So I genuinely was surprised by the trope and like the concept because I don't think a lot of people might take it well, but honestly, I love folklore, I love legends and stuff, so that's my jam. And oh my gosh, you guys, it's so atmospheric. It's not in not even sense like fairy tale with butterflies and pixie dust. It's like fairy tale but the creepy one. So I was really into it. If that's your jam, I think you'll really like it. Um, One thing though, for some reason, I wasn't able to really connect to the characters on a deeper level. I think it's because it's written in third point of view, like third person point of view. That's why I did give it 3 stars because I did like the book, but there were just some moments where I couldn't connect or where I was getting really frustrated, especially with the stepmom. I was just, oh, she was so annoying. But I'll for sure, even though I did give it 3 stars, I'll for sure continue this series because you don't really have a lot of books that talk about Slavic folklore, and also I think the concept is really interesting. So I'll for sure continue this series and I'll tell you guys what I think about it. So this concludes my wrap up. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video and let's chat in the comments. Bye!